Go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy to get 20% off your first month of cognitive behavioural therapy, with weekly sessions online with a therapist, in addition to worksheets, a journal, meditation and yoga videos, and unlimited messaging. There's strong evidence that CBT can help people who hoard, and accessing therapy online can be affordable and accessible. Find out more and get your discount at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy.
Flexibility is great. That's why there's yoga. Flexibility for your insurance coverage is great too. That's why there's United Healthcare Insurance Plans. Underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, United Healthcare Insurance Plans offer flexible, budget-friendly coverage for medical, vision, dental, and more. One of these plans may be right for you if you're, say, between jobs, coming off your parents' plan, turning a side hustle into a full hustle, or even missed open enrollment. Want more flexibility? Find out more about United Healthcare Insurance Plans at uh1.com.
Say hello to a new era of mental health care. Cerebral is here to help you achieve your mental wellness goals with professional therapy and medication management support. 100% online. You'll experience the all-new Cerebral Way, an innovative approach to mental wellness designed around you. You'll get a personalized treatment plan from a therapist, prescriber, or both in a safe and judgment-free space. Your Cerebral therapist or prescriber will outline a customized plan with clear milestones along the way, so you can get to feeling your best. With Cerebral, you're not alone in your mental health journey. We're here to empower you to live a fulfilling life. So take that first step towards a brighter future and sign up today at Cerebral.com/podcast and use code ACAST to get 15% off your first month. Offer only valid on monthly plans. Other exclusions may apply. Offer ends July 31st, 2024. See site for details. Think of all the sleep hacks you've ever heard. You could spend years trying them all, or you could instantly transform your sleep with Boll & Branch. They make the softest, most breathable bedding you'll ever feel, and it's all 20% off. That's their best sale of the entire season. Millions of sleepers love their buttery soft sheets, airy blankets, cloud-like duvets, and so much more. And you can try all of them for 20% off with promo code BUTTERY20. So hurry to bollandbranch.com today. That's BOLL and branch.com. See site for details.
Welcome to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder podcast. I am drowning in stuff and trying to find a way out. Listen as I explore the issues and delve deep as somebody profoundly affected by hoarding disorder. Find out more, including links to subscribe to the podcast and all my social media at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Finally, I am not a doctor. I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. Hey, how are you? In a bid to try and wean myself off beginning every episode with the word so, I'm going to start by just setting the scene. It is cold in my part of the world, which is to be expected in February. But still, I could do without it. But I have a big mug of steaming hot ginger tea. I have a big blanket. And I am watching the blobs of my lava lamp smash into each other. And it's quite satisfying. So today, I am going to start with a success of the week and a weird dilemma of the week. And then I'm going to look at 14 things that you should never do when dehoarding. And then there's going to be a top tip of the week. And then we're done. I'm recording on a Sunday, which is unusually organized for me. So let's get going with the success of the week and the weird dilemma of the week. These two are put in as a little point of interest. The success of the week helps to show both you and me that successes can happen. Bonuses can happen. We can do well, even if the big picture is quite stark. We can have moments of triumph, and we need to note those mentally to kind of fuel us in the harder bits. And the weird dilemma of the week, I get a lot of positive feedback about, because it's people saying, How do you have the same weird thought processes as me? And so it seems like it's quite a relatable thing for a lot of you. So my success of the week is kind of a success of about a year. And that is, I have still not bought an air fryer. I am a real sucker for kitchen gadgets. I love a kitchen gadget. But like most people with most kitchen gadgets, I buy them, use them relentlessly for 3 months, and then never touch them again. You know, I've got the juicer, I've got the bread maker, I've got all of the things. And obviously, I'm not great at getting rid of them when I stop using them, because I always think, well, maybe I'll start using it again. And an air fryer is exactly the kind of thing that I want to buy. First of all, it's a kitchen gadget, and that on its own can do the trick. Secondly, it promises to kind of save time, save effort, save energy, and I am all for all of those things. And so the temptation to get one is great. I love a gadget, and whenever people buy an air fryer, they rave about it, and it makes it even harder to resist. However, I have been resisting because I know my pattern. I know what happens with gadgets that initially seem like they're life-changing. And there's not one piece of evidence that an air fryer would follow any different pattern at all. And there's every chance that it will follow the usual pattern, and I will think it's amazing, and I will think, this is right, this is the one. I was right to buy this because look how it's changed my life. And then check in with me by summer, and I would go, oh yeah, I've still got that somewhere. And that would be that. So it feels weird to have a success being a negative. I have not bought an air fryer, but honestly, it is such an ongoing temptation that every week that goes by when I still don't have an air fryer is a success. And so that is my success this week. My weird dilemma of the week. I am a sucker for buying storage stuff. Boxes, baskets, bags, packets, you name it, I want it. And I buy these things to organize my things when, for reasons I will go into later, that is counterproductive and not very realistic, because the idea is to get rid of stuff and then organize what's left. Whereas if I keep buying, organizing stuff, then that's more stuff, and I don't even know what I'm going to need to organize yet. So I've bought, lots of boxes in my life, but I have these particular set of 3 plastic boxes that have actually always been perfect. I've had them for years, and they are see-through, so I can see what's in them. They have lids, which is great. They have handles, and they're just the perfect size. Often I buy these boxes and they're not quite big enough, or they're a bit too big. But these 3 that came in a pack are the perfect size. But I've used them for probably 10 years. And so by now, like one of the handles broken, another one of the clips that clips the lid on is broken. They're just very much past their best. So I had a dilemma about whether to replace them or not. But I decided that I would on condition. Now, the reason I would consider replacing them when I'm generally trying to stop bringing boxes in is because these very specific boxes have proven their worth. And I know that they work for me, which is not the case for most of the boxes and baskets and stuff that I buy. So my conditions were, I can only replace these 3 boxes if I can buy the precise same 3 boxes. It's a pack of 3. They have to be exactly the same size, same brand, same everything. And I could only replace them if I get rid of the old ones. And so the first challenge was trying to find this precise same pack of 3. And it was difficult because, it's a long time since I bought the original ones. And of course I was tempted by other boxes I found in the process. And I kept finding myself going, well, they're not the exact ones, but maybe these would do the trick. But no, I stayed focused. I kept going until I did finally find one obscure shop that sold the precise same pack of 3 boxes from the same brand, exactly the same. And given that that was my first criteria, I was allowed to order them. I allowed myself to order them. And I did, and they arrived, and they are perfect because they are replacing the other ones which were perfect but battered. The real dilemma came with the second part of my deal with myself. Okay, I've got the new boxes to precisely replace the precise old boxes. And the second part of my deal with myself is I have to now get rid of the old ones. And in theory, when I was making that deal with myself, that seemed logical. It seemed like it would make sense. I would have new ones. They would do exactly the same thing. I wouldn't need the old ones, so they could go. I had underestimated how much I would want to hold on to those old boxes. And that's where the weird dilemma was, considering that the old boxes were very much past their best, and I had shiny new ones to do exactly the purpose they'd been serving. I had real trouble persuading myself that the old ones should go, even though that was part of the deal with myself. I say the deal like I've been negotiating with terrorists or something. No, just my own brain, which is abusive itself in its own special way. So there I was, brand new boxes that were not broken, old, slightly broken boxes. But I was immediately going, well, they're only slightly broken. Maybe I can use them for a slightly different purpose, so it doesn't matter so much that that clip doesn't work, and it doesn't matter that that handle's broken. And that self-talk that comes straight from the hoarding disorder bit of my brain was strong. And it took so long. I realized essentially that what I was doing was delaying the decision to the point that ultimately I would forget that I was meant to be getting rid of the old ones, and I would just adapt to life with 6 of these boxes, 3 of them slightly broken. And once I identified that, I also knew that it was important that I kept to my deal. I kept to the bargain I'd made. Otherwise, how could I trust any future bargaining that I did? It was still hard though. It was still so hard. I anticipated that I might have a dilemma about it, but it was a really tough one for me to get my head round, partly because the original boxes were quite broken, but also because that was the deal. That was the deal, and I had to stick to it. They eventually went, but that was my surprisingly difficult weird dilemma of the week. So today I am going to talk about 14 things to never ever do when you are dehoarding. It is a while since I've been going through this process. I have a long way to go, but I am learning all the time and I am improving all the time. And so I want to share some of what I've learned, some from other people, some from my own experience, that is important to keep in mind if you want to either start making any progress or continue making progress if you've already made a start. So I came up with this list of 14 things to definitely avoid if you want to declutter your home and get to a place where you live somewhere that is just easier and more manageable for your day-to-day life. So thing number 1 to never do when dehoarding is to wait for inspiration to strike. Inspiration is great if you are inspired and motivated you can get a lot done in a short amount of time. It can really push you to take action. But we can't rely on inspiration 100% of the time, because sometimes it is not there. And if we use needing to be inspired as an excuse to not get started, then we are missing out on a lot of progress that we could be making. When inspiration is there, grasp it and embrace it and go with it. Enjoy it. But you also need a plan in place for when you're not inspired. And it may be that you get less done when you're not feeling inspired to dehoard, but getting less done is still better than getting nothing done. So I try and work with a combination of some routine activities that are not set in stone, because my personality means that I don't tend to respond very well to very set in stone rules, but I have kind of certain activities that I try and do at least one of every day. And at the same time, I leave space for, if inspiration does strike, I can take advantage of it and get some kind of super activity done for a while, knowing that that will die down again. But when it does, I've still got a more steady structure in place that will keep me moving forward. So while inspiration is brilliant, it's how I make significant progress sometimes. It can't be the only way you take action. Not if you want to make steady progress and really improve things in the long term. Number 2 thing to never ever do when you are trying to dehoard is get every single thing out of a box or a cupboard or a wardrobe with the intention of sorting it all out once and for all. I imagine I'm not the only person who's done this many times, and all it means is that for the next 2 years, my entire wardrobe is on the floor in front of the wardrobe instead of inside the wardrobe, because I sorted out 2 things, got overwhelmed, didn't know what to do, didn't have the skills to manage it, and left it where it was. If you get everything out, you might well have underestimated how much work it will take to sort the whole thing out, whether that is a box, a wardrobe, or a room. You may well get overwhelmed, which certainly in me and many people I hear from just makes you shut down altogether. Like your brain just goes, nope, and that's that. It's like the shutters come down and you're not coming in. It's impractical, and if you don't get it all done, it feels demoralizing to put the unsorted stuff back into the box. So you're more likely to leave it out, or you may be exhausted, so you're more likely to leave it out. But then that's just as demoralizing to have the pile of unfinished, unsorted stuff that you'd hoped you could sort and didn't. And it may be, if you do have the time and energy and skills to do a whole wardrobe in one day, that's still doable, even if you don't get it all out in the first place. You can clear out a corner of the wardrobe, or you can get out a quarter of the stuff in the box. And then if you get to the end of that, you can do the same again. It doesn't have to stop you if you don't get everything out in one go, whereas getting everything out feels like dooming yourself to failure, which then makes you feel like a failure, which is not very motivating to keep moving forward. The third thing to never ever do when dehoarding is to start with the really hard stuff. If you are new to this, or if it's been a while since you've managed to do any practical dehoarding, or if you're struggling, then going straight to letters from your dear departed grandparents, or going straight to your children's artwork is probably a leap too far. Unless you are close to the end of your dehoarding process and there's not much else left to do, it is usually better to start with something that doesn't feel like a big challenge to you. And that will be different for different people. The examples I used just then were nostalgic, sentimental items. You might be fine with those, but for you it's books, or it's clothes, or it's ornaments, or it's bath salts. It could be anything. You know for yourself what the really hard stuff is to sort out, what the stuff you never want to get rid of is. And if you're starting there when there are easier places you could be starting, then you might be putting up barriers that make it harder for you to make continual progress. And that's not to say shove all the difficult stuff right to the end of the process. It's not as clear cut as that. But if you have a huge amount to do, there is often no reason to start with the stuff that you know you're most likely to tie yourself in a knot over. Nobody needs that. You'll get to those things eventually, and by then, hopefully, you will have more skills, you will have more experience, you will have more knowledge about how to make those really difficult decisions because you've been practicing on slightly easier decisions.
Say hello to a new era of mental health care. Cerebral is here to help you achieve your mental wellness goals with professional therapy and medication management support. 100% online. You'll experience the all-new Cerebral Way, an innovative approach to mental wellness designed around you. You'll get a personalized treatment plan from a therapist, prescriber, or both in a safe and judgment-free space. Your Cerebral therapist or prescriber will outline a customized plan with clear milestones along the way, so you can get to feeling your best. With Cerebral, you're not alone in your mental health journey. We're here to empower you to live a fulfilling life. So take that first step towards a brighter future and sign up today at Cerebral.com/podcast and use code ACAST to get 15% off your first month. Offer only valid on monthly plans. Other exclusions may apply. Offer ends July 31st, 2024. See site for details.
Hey everyone, I'm Craig Robinson, co-host of the Ways to Win podcast, alongside my good friend John Calipari. I've been on the go recently. Phoenix, Kansas City, Chicago. If you're like me and have a home but aren't always at home, you have an Airbnb. Hosting your home or a spare room is a very practical side hustle. If you live in a big game town, you can Airbnb your place for fans to stay in. Your home might be worth more than you think. Find out how much at airbnb.com/host.
Do you want to be a dehoarding darling? You can be now at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. If you love the podcast and want a bit extra, you can finally sign up to be a dehoarding darling. Members will get an exclusive monthly post with an additional top tip, some podcast and music recommendations, and a personal update from me about how things are going. Find out the full details at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. So the fourth thing to never ever do when dehoarding is a trap that I definitely fall into, and that is don't move stuff from one place to another within your home, never quite pruning the total. And I definitely have fallen into this trap a lot. Like, I will have a huge pile of stuff and I will shift that pile of stuff into 4 bags. And then I need the space those bags are on, so I move the bags to a different part of the room and sort something else in that space, but I put it into bags and then I move those in order to get back to the first ones. And it's a constant process of, my least favorite word, churn. It's, you're not actually making progress. You're just shuffling. You're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic when the Titanic is sinking beneath you. Sometimes we need to move things around. Sometimes things are in the kitchen and they belong in the bathroom and they need to be moved from one part of your home to another. It's not to say you can never move things. However, be aware, try and tune in and ask yourself, am I just moving the same things again and again and again from one part of this room to another, or from one part of my home to another? Am I getting rid of things, or am I shuffling rather than anything actually leaving the house? It's a tricky one because you feel like you're being virtuous. You feel like I'm doing good things. Those things were in a pile and now they're in bags, so they're contained. And there is a role for that. There is a place for that. But you can't kid yourself that you've dehoarded when all you've done is separate things out a bit or put them in bags or boxes. The fifth thing to never ever do when trying to dehoard is another one that I'm a sucker for, and indeed it came up in my weird dilemma of the week. Don't buy stuff to organize your stuff. Firstly, it adds to your clutter. Ideally, you're not bringing things into the house that do not absolutely need to be brought into the house. And we need to remember that storage items are part of that. They're not an exception to the rule. It's not, unfortunately, don't bring anything unnecessary into the house unless it's a pretty box. That's not how it works. And as well as it adding to the clutter, it tricks you into thinking you're taking positive action. You can start to kid yourself that you're doing really well because you've bought all these things to organize with. And that's not progress. It's counterproductive even, but it's definitely not moving forward. And the other reason to avoid buying organizing stuff is that at this stage, you don't know what you're going to have left that will need to organize. Unless, again, you are very, very close to the end of your process. You don't know how many bookshelves you'll need. You don't know how many mug trees you'll need. You don't know how many pencil pots you'll need, because you don't know how many books and mugs and pencils will survive this dehoarding process. And it's a trap a lot of us fall into, but it's a vital one to be aware of. The sixth thing to never ever do when dehoarding is to expect the world from yourself. I'm talking about thinking that you're going to dehoard a 4-bedroom house that's not been looked at for 10 years in a weekend. I'm talking about clearing your entire bedroom in an afternoon. It is not realistic, because however much you do achieve, that will be eclipsed by your sense of disappointment in yourself and your sense that you have failed, when of course you can't dehoard an entire house in a weekend, or of course you can't clear your entire bedroom in an afternoon. And because your expectation and your hope was for these lofty goals, you can very quickly consider that a failure. Whereas if you have more realistic goals, if you set yourself standards that are humanly possible, you can feel an appropriate sense of achievement when you manage them. Setting yourself up to fail by setting expectations that are ridiculously high benefits nobody. The seventh thing to never do when trying to dehoard is to stick rigidly to a plan that is clearly not working. It may be that you had a very clear idea of what dehoarding was going to look like. You had a very clear picture of how many bags would go to the charity shop every week, or how many hours you would do, or exactly what form your dehoarding activities would take. And having clear ideas can be good to start with. But what I am trying really hard to learn myself is that that doesn't mean they are set in stone. It can be a good launching off point, but what we have to do is reassess periodically how those plans are going and if they are serving us as we hope they would. It might be that you envisaged giving 3 bags to a charity shop every week, but actually that's not enough. And you have bags and bags ready to go to the charity shop, but in your head you're saying 3 a week, and so you have a backlog. Or it may be that you did do 3 a week for ages when you were sorting out clothes, but now you're sorting a different part of the house, and the things that are leaving your home from this part of the house are not really suited to a charity shop donation. Maybe it's things that are more clearly rubbish to go in the bin. And so because you feel like, well, my plan was 3 charity shop bags a week and I'm not achieving that now, and I was before, so I'm failing, and that isn't conducive to long-term success. Sometimes plans work for a bit and then they stop suiting us, or they stop suiting the circumstances. Sometimes they were never quite right in the first place. And if you get stubborn and dig your heels in because you said you'd do it this way, even when that's not working, all that does is disadvantage you and the progress you could be making if you weren't setting yourself up to fail by sticking rigidly to a plan that is proving to not be the one you need right now. Thing number 8 to never ever do when dehoarding is to beat yourself up when you find it hard. If you're like me, you're quite self-critical and you find it hard to give yourself praise, but find it very easy to yell at yourself when you don't do something to the standard you want to or imagined you would. And you can argue as much as you like that it helps to motivate you. Telling yourself off kind of keeps you on your toes. And I think it can do occasionally, but I think the bigger picture is that more often it's demotivating. It does not do anything to help you. It just piles on reasons why you are not good enough, you're not a good person, you're not good at this. And all of those thoughts make you miserable. And being miserable is not conducive to making progress in anything, really. Certainly not in a task as epic and difficult as dehoarding your home. And so even if you feel really disappointed in yourself, see whether you can work through that in a way that doesn't involve beating yourself up. Can you talk to a therapist about it? Can you write yourself a letter and say, I'm really disappointed in this, and kind of have an almost back and forth letter writing thing with yourself while you look at why you disappointed yourself? What went wrong? What were the reasons for it? Could you look at it a bit differently? Or just journaling in any way can be really, really helpful to work out exactly what's going on. Because if you can understand why you're finding it hard, I think in most cases that will help you to make a lot more progress than defaulting to just yelling at yourself instead. The 9th thing to not do when dehoarding is to list every single thing for sale online. Whether that is on eBay, whether it's giving things away on Freegal or FreeCycle or Facebook Marketplace. I get why you want to do it. I do. I really get it. As hoarders, we often feel more protective of our stuff than most people do. We feel like we want it to go to good use. We anthropomorphize things. Whole episode on anthropomorphism with Jan a few weeks ago that I will link to in the show notes. We feel more acutely than a lot of people that things, if they're going to leave our house, should be going to a good purpose. And listing everything online can definitely be part of that. The other part, of course, is thinking, well, this cost a lot of money or this could be worth money, so it would be a waste not to list it online. And those are all valid concerns, right? But what is also a valid concern, and what is more pertinent when you are trying to dehoard, is that you are trying to dehoard. And if you list every pair of knitting needles and every battered old book and every dented tin for sale on eBay, every pair of jeans on Depop, all of that, it slows you down massively. It's not even just the listing process. It's taking photos. It's weighing it to calculate postage. It's then posting it or relisting it when it doesn't sell. Keeping track. How on earth do you know who ordered what? It is a hassle. And this could be the time to have a bit of a conversation with yourself about how much really you need to do that. And if something is very valuable and has a high resale value, maybe it's worth it. But if there are many, many, many items, and if a lot of them do not have a high resale value, it's probably not worth it for the odd pound or the odd £5 that you would get in return. And also be aware of this thing called the endowment effect, which I also did an episode on, where anybody, not just hoarders, but anybody, it's been proven in many tests that as soon as we own something, we value it much more highly than it is worth, just by dint of owning it. And so just because you think that crochet kit should be worth money does not mean that anybody else actually wants to pay that for it. So you've also, if you do think something's worth a lot, you've got to be somewhat objective about it. Maybe you can do searches on eBay for completed items only so you can see exactly how much a similar thing sold for. I had a broken phone and discovered that even though it was broken and didn't turn on, previous ones that were also broken in the same way were selling on eBay for £150. And for me, that was absolutely worth it. So I sold that phone to somebody who presumably could fix it and resell it for more. That was great. But I also, when I first started dehoarding, was listing every craft item that I had probably only paid £3 or £4 for in the first place. And it took so much time, and all those trips to the post office are a pain. And I don't know whether, well, I think it was partly a delaying tactic on my part. It was an excuse to not get rid of things because I could still list them on eBay. But it was also a need within myself to think that those things were going to go to use. I felt wasteful. I felt guilty for how much stuff I had that I hadn't used. And I felt like it would redeem me a bit if somebody else would at least use them. Now, after a few weeks of furiously listing things that sold for £1 and realizing it was ridiculous, what I did was I put a lot of craft things into a few big bags and then offered them on free cycle for any charity that did like craft activities with their service users, and ended up giving bags of craft stuff to a mental health charity where mental health service users would go and do craft activities for an afternoon a week. They were really happy. I was really happy. I got rid of a lot in one go and all was well. But there is also a time, and this is controversial to some, but I don't think it should be. There is also a role for just throwing things away, even if in an ideal world they could be sold or donated or repurposed. If you live in a regular home that is not hoarded and that is not at a crisis point, it is harder to justify just putting something in the bin when somebody could get use of it. That is harder to argue for. However, when you're living in a hoarded home and you're trying at all to get rid of things, that is not a normal situation to be in. It's not a regular situation to be in. And it calls sometimes for extraordinary actions. And sometimes that includes putting things in the bin, even if in theory they could be saved. If I have an item of clothing that with a really good wash and some repair could feasibly be reused, but I know that that's a lot more work than I'm willing to put in, I'm a lot more comfortable these days with just throwing it away. It may not be ideal. It may not be very eco-friendly. It may not be what I would do in a perfect world, but this is not a perfect world, and my home is certainly not a perfect home. Should I ever get to a place where my belongings are sparse and I have the time and energy and space to make sure every item goes to the best place, that is brilliant. I would love that. But when we're in a hoarding situation, we just can't over-focus on each individual item because it will get in the way of progress we want to make. So much as you might want to list everything for sale and get every penny you can, it is usually not worth it for most things. And don't think you're wasting your money if you don't resell things. The money was wasted when you made the purchase. It's gone. It's done. That was the waste of money. What happens from here on in is a different matter. So that was number 9. Don't list every single thing for sale online. The 10th thing to never do when dehoarding is get too caught up in the details. It is easy to, when faced with a giant mountain of stuff, to obsess over every tiny, tiny scrap of paper, or precisely what you're going to do with certain things. And in most cases when dehoarding, that is unrealistic, especially if you're early on in the process. Later on in your dehoarding process, and I very much mean when you're very much by the end, there can be space for looking at the detail more. The tiny bits, the little bits. But for most of your dehoarding process, you need to focus on the things that will make a real difference. Whether that's the physically big things or the changes in your thoughts and feelings about stuff. Those are the things that will make a difference at this stage, not what you do with that one cracked mug. The 11th thing to never ever do when trying to dehoard is get diverted, which is easier said than done, of course, especially because there is a lot of crossover with ADHD and hoarding, And people with ADHD can be quite prone to diversions, as can, most of the population these days. And it's easy to say, don't get diverted. If it was as easy to not get diverted, I wouldn't even need to say it. We just would do it. But there are certainly things you can do to help prevent yourself from getting diverted. Putting your phone onto silent or onto do not disturb is a really good one, because if my phone beeps, I pick it up to see what beeped. And that one notification leads me to check other things, and they lead me to check other things. And before I know it, I'm on Instagram scrolling through my friends' photos, and I don't even remember why I picked the phone up, but I'm definitely not making dehoarding progress. So phone on do not disturb. You can still pick your phone up, of course. It's not to say it gets rid of that entirely, but getting external notifications on your phone is a real trigger for diversions. Also, if you're sorting through books or letters or photos, do what you can to not start reading every book or every letter, or not start looking at every photo from your high school reunion. Know where your danger zones are for yourself and put things in place, if at all you can, to avoid getting diverted and taking away from your dehoarding time. The 12th thing not to do when dehoarding is don't aim for perfection. Perfection is elusive in the best of circumstances, and these are not the best of circumstances. And the problem with aiming for perfection is you won't achieve it, and so you will feel like you've let yourself down, whether you have or you haven't. The other problem with aiming for perfection is that it's such an overwhelming thing to ask of yourself that you might freeze before you do anything at all. It's such a cliche, but if I can't do it perfectly, I won't do it at all, is something I'm working really hard on eliminating from my own brain. And partly my 2023 phrase of it'll do is genuinely helping with that. When I spot that I'm starting to get in like a spiral of perfectionism, I try and replace that thinking with it'll do. And it's so simple, but it just relaxes me and reminds me that it doesn't all have to be perfect. If you aim for perfection, you will fail. Nobody likes failing. And that's if you get started in the first place. The 13th thing of 14 things to never do when dehoarding is to put your stuff into a storage unit. Storage units are expensive, and you put things in there and you promise yourself that they'll be in there for a month max, and then 5 years later it's all still there. And that's partly because when things are out of sight, they're out of mind. You, somewhere in your brain, have thought, okay, that they are taken care of, and they are not taken care of. They are in a box that you are paying for weekly or monthly. And it adds up. It adds up. If, and I believe this is often true, clutter is made up of delayed decisions, then storage units, I think, are the epitome of that. There is nothing that says delayed decision more than most storage units. If you don't need it in your home, do you really need it? What are you saving it for? Getting a storage unit feels to me like a really dangerous thing to do, because once your stuff is in there, you've got even less motivation, even less reason to try and get rid of it. And the final 14th thing to never do, ever, when you're dehoarding, is to give up when it gets hard. It will get hard. some of it feels endlessly hard. Some of it is surprisingly easy, but there are going to be hard bits to dehoarding. And if we quit because it gets hard, we quit and nothing gets better. And something in our brain says, I better not try again because last time I tried it was so hard that I stopped. So the very act of stopping reinforces to the fear part of your brain that you absolutely cannot do this. And that is not the message you want to have when you're trying to tackle something so huge. It will get hard. There will be hard bits. I'm not going to pretend that this is something where you'll get in the flow and have no difficult decisions to make. That is a very rare situation. There will be hard bits. It will not all be hard, but there will be hard bits. And if we quit, everything stops. Everything stops. And we need to keep moving forward, even if sometimes it's at a snail's pace. Keep doing something. Keep doing something. Even if it's not what you'd planned, even if it's a different direction to what you thought, even if it's anything, keep doing something, because quitting when it gets hard means you'll be stuck in this situation for much, much longer. I'd love to hear from you the things you think we should never do when dehoarding. What can we add to that list of 14? All my contact details are on the website at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Do you want to be a dehoarding darling? You can be now at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. If you love the podcast and want a bit extra, you can finally sign up to be a dehoarding darling. Members will get an exclusive monthly post with an additional top tip, some podcast and music recommendations, and a personal update from me about how things are going. Find out the full details at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. So my top tip this week is from the Frugal Friends podcast, and they're talking in this episode about the benefits and drawbacks of having a no-spend challenge. And it was a really interesting episode because a no-spend challenge is the kind of thing that I quite like the idea of, but then rarely succeed at. So it was interesting to hear from their expert perspective when that would be effective and when it would not. And this little mini clip is one of the reasons, one of the groups of people a no spend challenge might not be super effective for, but they have a nice alternative suggestion if you still really, really want to do it. So have a listen.
If you think that you might fall victim to binge spending, this would probably, in my estimation, be one of the number one reasons that a no spend challenge might not be for you. If you think that binge spending is going to be too much of a temptation or too much of a reality for you, it's too much of the pendulum swing, this would probably be the number one reason that a no spend challenge is not going to actually serve you well.
Yeah. And if you've found this to be true for you, but you still really want to try one, I would say don't go all discretionary spending. Don't do all your spending, but just pick one expense that you are making a lot that you want to make less of, or one location of spending. Think about your spending triggers and just choose one thing.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's coffee. Maybe it's Target. Maybe it's, I'm not going to get food at Chipotle on the way home from the grocery store. Pick one thing and go with that instead of all of it. Because I think you'll still find that you have space to contemplate, but you are not feeling the pressure and the burden to be perfect.
So I will link to the Frugal Friends podcast in the show notes. It's a really interesting listen. I enjoy it. I think they offer sound advice that isn't all about mega restrictions, or it isn't kind of all stocks and shares and savings accounts. It's very kind of practical, applicable advice, which is good. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. You can find more online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. You can find me on Twitter at @thathoarder and on Facebook at Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support, and do subscribe to this podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes.